A PowerPoint presentation. Logo, Ties Center. Text, Professional Learning Group Series. Building Inclusive Education Systems for All Students, Session 4. Building Capacity Through Support and Accountability. Amy Howley, EDD, and Deborah Telfer, PhD.
This webinar is the fourth in a series about what it takes for districts to be effective in their practice of inclusive instructional and organizational leadership. I'm Deborah Telfer, Director of the University of Cincinnati's Systems Development and Improvement Center, SDI Center for short. Our center is one of the partners in the TIES project, the National Technical Assistance Center on Inclusive Practices and Policies. In this webinar, we focus on building capacity through support and accountability.
New slide. A woman looking at sticky notes stuck to a wall.
What is capacity? It's a term that is applied to the potential of organizations. What does the organization know and what can it do? The idea is familiar enough when applied to individuals, as in living up to one's potential. And as with individuals, the way to build capacity involves learning, in this case, organizational learning. Everyone can learn, and so can every organization. One type of organizational learning that helps school districts and their schools build capacity relates to the effective use of systems of support and internal accountability.
New slide. A silhouette of a group of people with many gray question marks and one red question mark above them. Text, Expectations and Accountability.
Leadership is responsible for framing expectations for districts and for schools, and for helping all the adults embody the expectations. The adults in a school system need to do more than live with the expectations. They need to live inside such expectations. When people live inside or embody an expectation, they make it a part of their everyday life in terms of their beliefs, values, words, and practices. At least that's the hope, according to observers like Richard Elmore, who talks about a common culture of expectations in his 2004 book, School Reform from the Inside Out.
New slide. A calendar.
Leadership often communicates expectations as goals. However, goals are just the tip of the iceberg. More deeply, expectations are what specify norms of thought, speech, and behavior. Through their impact on norms, expectations play an important part in guiding and directing district and school culture. Such norms characterize the way we do things around here. Ultimately, real improvement entails improving the way we routinely think, talk, and do things. Changes that do not reach this depth of implementation or even embodiment don't typically stick. What is sometimes called deep implementation is the key to real change. Without it, people may give lip service to the expectations associated with the change, but they don't take them to heart.
New slide. A circuit board. Text, Instructional Efficacy. The relationship between efficacy and capacity.
As indicated in the previous slide, positive change in district and school culture occurs when the adults internalize and then embody norms of thinking, talking, and doing things that focus on improvement. Those norms lead to deep implementation of practices that work better and are more equitable. In other words, improvement leads to increased efficacy, and efficacy is the fundamental capacity school districts want to build. In fact, instructional efficacy sits at the core of the work of school districts. All other types of efficacy, for instance in budgeting, building maintenance, and cafeteria work, support the efficacy of the work that takes place at the core.
New slide. A pair of hands and a handshake with word clouds in them. The word clouds contain words such as cooperate, unite, communicate, serve, assist, collaborate, help out, merge, expand, welcome, blend, share, and so on.
As it turns out, several kinds of core efficacy are important. Individual teacher efficacy, individual principal efficacy, and teacher collective efficacy. The three types of efficacy interact, but of the three, Teacher collective efficacy seems to be the most important.
New slide. Two rainbow-colored head silhouettes face each other. Text, turn and talk number 1.
Now might be a good time to stop the video and talk with 2 or 3 others who are sitting near you. The purpose of the discussion is to brainstorm a list of strategies a district can use to build the collective efficacy of its teachers.
New slide. Text, debriefing turn and talk number 1.
In your discussion, you probably included at least one, and probably more, ideas for helping teachers learn. Professional development sessions, instructional coaching, peer coaching, instructional rounds, meetings of professional learning communities, and so on. You might also have mentioned providing teachers with high-quality instructional materials, providing enough staff, improving teachers' working conditions, and so on.
New slide. A highway sign that reads, Exit 23, Accountability straight ahead. Text, efficacy and internal accountability.
The other side of efficacy, and therefore also of district capacity, concerns the willingness of personnel to improve their practice. Should I learn this? Is this my responsibility? Supporting personnel to answer yes to these questions is what internal accountability is all about. The end product of an internally accountable system is a workforce in the district that is committed to improving performance.
New slide. Two rainbow-colored head silhouettes face each other. Text, turn and talk number 2.
At this point, your group might find it helpful to pause the video briefly and discuss the questions on the screen. Think about norms, expectations, goals, and performance targets. How is each of these different from the others? How is each important to an improvement effort?
New slide. Several RG levers mounted along a wall.
Your discussion probably led you to realize that norms, expectations, goals, and performance targets all interact to produce a package of organizational levers or drivers. These are the key actions that can be taken to provide critical support for system-wide improvement, such as ensuring that all teachers participate in essential professional learning. Getting the levers to function in sync is a critical leadership task for improvement efforts with high likelihood of success.
New slide. Text, organizational levers or drivers.
Here's an example. Let's say a school district wants to increase the access of students with disabilities to the general education curriculum. A host of impediments can stand between this goal and its realization. Some relate to norms, others to expectations, others to goals, and others to performance targets. The levers for change involve removing all of these impediments. In terms of goals and performance targets, the district needs to be explicit. Leaders need to say something like this. Right now, 10% of our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities get to spend 80% or more of their time in general education classrooms. Our goal is to increase that percentage. In year 1 of the improvement work, our performance target is for 20% of our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities to spend 80% or more of their time in general education classrooms. In terms of expectations, leaders might say, we expect all teachers to participate in professional development to prepare them to work with students with disabilities in general education settings. And in terms of norms, leaders might say, we want all general education teachers to assume responsibility for the education of each child in their classrooms, even when other teachers or paraprofessionals are part of the child's educational team.
New slide. A yellow road sign. It reads, right, with an arrow pointing right, and, wrong, with an arrow pointing left. Text, real accountability is internal.
Note that the norms, expectations, goals, and performance targets that define accountability in this case relate to internal district decisions about the right things to do. No external regulatory body is insisting on the change. For example, increased inclusiveness. District leadership is insisting on this change. When implementation of the change is actually underway, the adults in the system will hold themselves and one another accountable to the actions needed to ensure deep implementation of the change. In other words, real accountability works on the way we do things around here.
New slide. A sign in the woods. It reads, responsibility. Text, internal accountability works better than external accountability.
Internal accountability is what works. A lot of research and a lot of practical experience show that. If educators, including community participants, are serious about high expectations for students, then high expectations and accompanying norms must apply to the adults as well. When internal accountability for the success of all students prevails, the adults across the system feel, think, and act responsibly towards students, families, and communities, and students do better. Internal accountability fosters local support and often helps increase community and family engagement.
New slide. A large commercial building being constructed. Text, accountability and support.
Being accountable to one another in this way means that support is widely available to help ourselves and one another inhabit the high expectations held by the district, or at the very least to address district goals in good faith. When districts provide the support and structures needed for all personnel to meet expectations and address goals, they improve performance at all levels of the organization.
New slide. A line graph, bars from a bar graph, slices from a pie chart, and a magnifying glass. Text, support and performance targets.
Note that, whatever the state of organizational culture, leadership is obliged to define and address particular goals. It cannot work only on the culture. It must always address the core work of the organization. Effective schools and districts, based on identified needs, establish goals and performance targets both at the district and the school level. At the district level, resources, personnel, programmatic, fiscal, are intentionally aligned to address the goals. Performance targets related to the goals help the organization consider the evidence relating to everyone's combined efforts. Although state assessment data and other sources of data on student performance provide important feedback to the district, data on adult implementation of agreed-upon practices are essential in gauging the district's progress in making needed instructional improvements.
New slide. An empty classroom with desks and a chalkboard. Text, internal accountability and data about instruction.
Data about instruction are the most useful data that leadership teams can consider. Substantial improvement in learning and in test scores requires widespread changes in instruction. Those widespread changes don't typically come from external accountability, because external accountability focuses only on summative measures, such as high-stakes test scores, not on formative measures of instructional effectiveness. Furthermore, external accountability is often punitive. Internal accountability, by contrast, is, or at least should be, supportive and mutually reinforcing. Its feedback loop reinforces the motivation to improve instruction.
New slide. Two rainbow-colored head silhouettes face each other. Text, turn and talk number 3.
Now might be a good time for another turn and talk. Please pause the video briefly and discuss the questions on the screen. What steps should a school district take in order to cultivate internal accountability? What familiar practices from the external accountability experience need to be altered in order to focus on internal accountability? Why? What familiar practices from the external accountability experience need to be retained in service of internal accountability?
New slide. Text, debriefing turn and talk number 3.
In your discussion, you may have noted that educators often associate external accountability with the fear of high-stakes test scores. Fear is definitely counter to learning. Getting rid of that familiar part of the experience of external accountability is very important. Shifting attention away from worries and fears about test scores, districts cultivate internal accountability by shifting attention toward instruction. Formative feedback about instruction helps educators improve their instructional practices. And when instructional practice notably improves, so will learning, and so will test scores. A focus on instruction that feeds internal accountability can yield impressive results in several years, and sometimes a little faster, according to Michael Fullen. A lot of research has affirmed that more rapid turnarounds are illusory. They don't last.
New slide. A winding path going up a mountain with a flag on top. Text: Internal accountability is support in service of high expectations.
If internal accountability means support in service of high expectations, then leadership is accountable for providing that support. Indeed, district leadership teams have control of nearly all the levers that can be pulled to provide the required support. The support needed is almost entirely a question of personnel, so improvement levers notably include recruitment, selection, training, evaluation, and support of personnel. In other words, districts determine whom to assign where and how to support them in those locations. These matters require a lot of attention from district leadership, and this attention depends on knowledge about current instructional practices and determinations about what effective instructional practices to adopt. Decisions about how to provide high-quality professional development to district personnel are also key.
New slide. Text: Evaluation for instructional improvement versus evaluation for compliance.
Evaluating teaching is very different from teacher evaluation that is required for compliance with state regulations. Internal accountability, by contrast, involves everyone who performs core work, that is, central office administrators, principals, teachers, related services personnel, and paraprofessionals, in efforts to make judgments on a regular basis about how to improve teaching.
New slide. Two rainbow-colored head silhouettes face each other. Text: Turn and talk number 4.
At this point, your group might find it helpful to pause the video briefly and discuss the question on the screen. What resources can districts use to foster conversations about instructional improvement?
New slide. Text: Debriefing. Turn and talk number 4.
One often hears that assessment is ongoing and teachers assess student learning as they teach. The same is true of conversations about instruction. Just as teaching is a collaborative act between educator and students, conversation requires at least 2 voices. The more voices that join the conversation, the more the conversation begins to represent the organization and its culture, the way we do things around here. Districts need to reallocate time in multiple ways to support conversations about instruction. They also need to put structures in place that allow all core personnel to join the conversation about instructional improvement and to take part in the improvement work.
New slide. A silhouette of a crowd in shades of black and gray. Text: Aligning human resources.
Support, including the reallocation of time, must be funded, in other words, resourced. Does that mean it's impossible for under-resourced districts to build capacity? Certainly not. First of all, whatever resources a district does have can always be aligned better with district goals. That's because any system embeds budgetary habits from the past, and these habits can be changed. Second, the way existing staff are assigned can be changed without additional funding. It's not a question of doing more with less, but more with the same. Realignment of resources in line with goals is inherently productive, and it inherently builds capacity, whatever the prevailing limits. It's an incremental approach, and combined with stable leadership, incremental approaches build capacity and internal accountability.
New slide. Text: Building capacity for data use.
Conversation about instruction needs a central focus. Most teachers are not passionate about learning theories, and they are often fearful of test score data, when misused as previously described. Information about how instruction is going, however, has the potential to capture everyone's hearts and minds if provided supportively. At least 2 resources exist for supplying such support. 1. Relevant models showing educators how to use data to inform instructional decisions. And 2. Coaching support that guides educators in the ongoing use of data to inform instructional improvement.
New slide. Text, wrapping up.
Let's sum up. For organizational leaders to build organizational capacity and internal accountability, they need to 1. Focus on the core work of the organization. In schools and districts, the core work primarily involves instruction and support for instruction. 2. Realize that norms, expectations, goals, and performance targets interact in response to powerful levers of organizational improvement. Once they begin to change in positive ways, these features of organizational culture also combine into a package that itself acts as a lever of change. 3. Build a system of internal accountability that focuses attention on improving instruction. 4. Support personnel by aligning resources to engage educators in instructional conversations and collaborative improvement processes. Capacity building starts from the ground up with leadership, both from individuals and teams, that thinks differently about improving the organization. Cultivating collective efficacy is at the heart of the work. It requires focused attention on making positive changes to organizational culture, accountability structures, and support mechanisms.
New slide. 4 students in a classroom, one of whom has a tracheal tube. Text, TIES Center is supported through a cooperative agreement, number H326Y170004, with the Research to Practice Division, Office of Special Education Programs, U.S. Department of Education. Project Officer, Susan Weigert. Opinions expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the position or policy of the U.S. Department of Education. The National Center on Education Outcomes, NCEO, leads the TIES Center partnership. There are 6 additional collaborating partners: Arizona Department of Education, CAST, University of Cincinnati, University of Kentucky, University of North Carolina Charlotte, and University of North Carolina Greensboro. Logos: NCEO, National Center on Educational Outcomes, Arizona Department of Education, University of Cincinnati, University of Kentucky. CAST, Until Learning Has No Limits, the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. UNC, Charlotte.